Chapter 1. The Black Square. A sheet of engraved copper, printed in 1617, holds a field of solid black. This plate, a sheet of engraved copper, is almost nothing. Along each of the four borders, in small Roman letters, a single Latin clause is repeated, et sic in infinitum, and so on to infinity. There is no figure, no globe, no hand of God. The ink does not fade toward the edges. It simply stops, and the words take over, as if the darkness continued under the paper and under the table and under the palatinate itself. This is Reliquary Obscura. Today, Robert Fludd, the English physician who had the void engraved, and how the pictures outlived the philosophy they were drawn to serve. Robert Fludd had this void cut. He was an English physician, a gentleman of Kent, living in London. The plate comes from his great book, a folio, a book of the largest printed size, whose Latin title is Utriusque Cosmi Historu, the history of the two worlds, the macrocosm and the microcosm, the greater world and the human frame. The first volume appeared at Oppenheim in 1617. Across 2 volumes, the shop cut more than 60 plates. The black field is one of the earliest, a diagram of the primordial darkness in Fludd's cosmogony, the chaos that exists before divine light acts upon it, and before the waters, which he also calls the Spirit of the Lord, are drawn forth. He sent the book abroad because London would not cut the copper. 14 years later, he wrote down the price. Home printers had demanded £500 to print the first volume and to find the cuts. Beyond the seas, the work was printed at no cost of his, and that as I would wish. The sentence is his own account, given in 1631. It is why you can look at the plate at all. How did the pictures outlive the philosophy they were drawn to serve? 3 scenes will answer. A Buckinghamshire parson nails a pamphlet to a London doctor's door, and the doctor answers in English, the only time he ever did. A mathematician in the Austrian lands appends a critique to a book of measured harmony and treats the Englishman's cosmic diagrams as pictures that cannot prove. A historian in 1966 holds up one engraving and says, "It shows the lost interior of Shakespeare's stage." The pictures those scenes turn on have names, and the names will stay put. The Black Square, the Woman on the Chain, the Monochord, the Temple of Music, the Memory Theater. They left Oppenheim in a folio that was itself unfinished, planned larger than the press ever completed. They outlived the system they were drawn to serve. The Black Square is one of a sequence. In the first volume, the cosmogony moves as a set of diagrams, darkness first, then divine light acting on chaos, then the waters. The black field is the first page of that sequence, a printed claim about Genesis cut as a rectangle of ink. Later plates in the same book will put figures back into the frame, a woman, a string, a stage. This one withholds them. Almost 3 centuries after Oppenheim, Kazimir Malevich on the Black Square on a gallery wall at the last Futurist exhibition of 1915 in Petrograd. Later commentary noticed that a German occult folio had already printed a field of black as Genesis, and that the field had been sitting in libraries while oil paint learned to do the same work. No chain of influence joins the two. Malevich was not illustrating an English physician. What later eyes noticed is a rhyme in ink. Fludd designed from London. A Palatine workshop cut what he sent. He was a fellow of the College of Physicians, the son of a war treasurer to Elizabeth I, an Oxford Master of Arts who had fought that college for the right to practice and then become one of its officers. The philosophy convinced few later natural philosophers. The picture survived. The black square is ink, stopped by a border of words that say infinity. The words do the work a field of ink cannot do by itself. They claim that the darkness continues. The book that holds them continues only as far as the press reached. The man who ordered the cut would be carried home to Kent and laid under ragstone he had already placed in a chancel. The copper went on without him. London would not cut the copper. Begin with the house in Kent and the treasurer's son who should have been ordinary. Chapter 2. The Gentleman of Kent. Kent, 1574. The man who had the void engraved was a war treasurer's son. Millgate House stands in the parish of Bierstead, among the orchards and the ragstone of the Maidstone country. In January 1574, a son was born there to Sir Thomas Fludd. The date is commonly given as the 17th. Older reckonings write 1573-4, the year still turning in March. He was baptized that year. He was named Robert. Sir Thomas had been Treasurer of War to Elizabeth I in France and the Low Countries, paymaster to the Queen's forces on the continental campaigns, and he sat in Parliament. This is the world that makes what the son became strange. A war treasurer's son, born in a Kentish house with a coat of arms, sent at the proper age to the proper college. In 1591, he entered St. John's College, Oxford, as a commoner. St. John's in the 1590s was a center of high Anglicanism, a college of the settlement. He took the Bachelor of Arts on the 3rd of February 1596-7 by the old calendar, and the Master of Arts on the 8th of July 1598. Oxford gave him Galen and the required medical texts, because those were the books a degree demanded. The Continent would give him the other library. The master's degree was taken in the summer of 1598. For the next 6 years, Robert Fludd lived abroad as a student of medicine and chemistry, teaching in noble households, moving through France, Spain, Italy, and Germany. The itinerary survives only as that list of countries. No day book remains that would let a biographer walk him from city to city. One winter he himself recalled. He spent that winter in the Pyrenees, on his own account, studying theurgy with Jesuits. Theurgy is the learned practice of divine or angelic ritual, ceremony aimed at God rather than at the petty spirits of the grimoire shelves. The Jesuit order was the great teaching engine of the Catholic Reformation. A high Anglican Oxford master sat a winter with the Society of Jesus and took instruction in ritual. He came home an English physician, carrying practices the College of Physicians had left outside the Galenic syllabus. What he absorbed, measured by the books he later printed, can be told as people doing things. Followers of the physician, Paracelsus, dead half a century, treated disease as an invader rather than a humoral imbalance, and they wrote matter as salt, sulfur, and mercury. Alchemists described transformation as a law that ran through metals and through the world. Latin readers, in the line Johannes Reuchlin had opened, used a Christianized Kabbalah as a grammar of creation, Hebrew names enlisted for a Mosaic cosmos. Physicians spoke of the greater world and the human frame as matching instruments. Learned men studied hidden virtues in stones, plants, magnets, and stars. 6 years is long enough to walk into that literature. The last years of the 16th century were dense with it. The curriculum was already on the shelves. He returned to England in 1604 with a reputation in chemistry. He entered Christ Church, Oxford, to turn the travel into degrees the College of Physicians would have to notice. A supplicant in medicine had to show that he had read the required texts, the Galenic and Hippocratic ones. Fludd performed that obedience. He defended 3 theses. On the 14th of May, 1605, he made his supplication. On the 16th, he received the degrees of Bachelor of Medicine and Doctor of Medicine together. He could put on the Galenic coat when a university required it. He would spend the next 4 years proving to London that he thought the coat was incomplete. He was now a doctor. London was next, and the college that did not want him. Chapter 3. The Paracelsian Physician. London, 1606. Robert Fludd has a medical degree and a college that will not have him. He settled in Fenchurch Street and applied to the College of Physicians for the right to practice. The college was the gate. Without it, a medical degree was a university compliment. With it, a man could hold a handsome house, keep an apothecary, and be called in to the kind of patients who paid. The gate stayed shut. Early in 1606, he was examined twice. On the 7th of February, the censors reported that he had left them unsatisfied, and that he was nevertheless qualified to practice. A censor is a college officer who examines physicians. Qualification left him short of fellowship and short of peace. He had adopted Paracelsian views, and he had not troubled to hide a low opinion of the ancient authorities the college existed to police. On the 2nd of May, he was cited before the censors for alleged expressions of contempt for the Galenic system. He denied the charges. The accusers did not appear. He was dismissed with an admonition. The same year, he was examined 3 times for the fellowship and, on the 22nd of December, pronounced dignus, worthy. Worthiness left the quarrel open. He carried himself, the Latin minute says, so insolently that on the 21st of March, 1608, he was admonished again. On the 20th of September, 1609, he was at last elected a fellow. Between the first examinations and the fellowship lay more than 3 years of repeated trials and rebukes. The college's own sequence is the spine: examined, admonished, examined, worthy, admonished, admitted. After that, the career turns. He became a prosperous London physician. He kept a handsome establishment. He had his own apothecary under his roof, which was unusual. Most doctors sent out. He kept an amanuensis, to whom he dictated, at untimely hours, the treatises on things divine and human that would make his name abroad. Thomas Fuller, writing a generation later in the Worthies, ascribed Fludd's success with patients to a faith natural he produced in them, which aided the well-working of his drugs. Fuller's sentence is a character sketch. It is also a period admission that the doctor's presence was part of the medicine. The college, having admitted him, used him. He was censor 4 times, 1618, 1627, 1633, and 1634. In 1614, he took part in an inspection of the London apothecaries. In 1618, he helped to author the Pharmacopoeia Londinensis, the college's directory of standardized pharmaceutical preparations. The man who had been cited for contempt of Galen was now writing the official list of what a London pharmacist might compound. That is a measure of arrival. Among his colleagues was William Harvey. Fludd watched Harvey's dissections at the college. 2 printed moments, which later writers sometimes crush into one, need to be kept apart. In 1623 at Frankfurt, Fludd published the Anatomiae Amphitheatrum, a 3-fold anatomy. In it, he set out a mystical and cosmological scheme of the blood's movement. The blood carries spirit. The sun is a vessel of the Lord's Spirit, and as the sun circulates life upon the earth, so the blood circulates life in the body. This is the human frame doing what the greater world does. Harvey's De Motu Cordis, on the motion of the heart, would not appear until 1628. Fludd's 1623 circulation is a correspondence drawn before the anatomical book. Then, around 1629, in the Pulsus section of his Medicina Catholica, Fludd became one of the first physicians, often called the first, to support Harvey's book in print. He took his colleague's demonstration as confirmation of the cosmological circuit he already held. Whether anything in Fludd's earlier scheme influenced Harvey is a question historians of medicine have not closed. The word circulation itself was still ambiguous. Friendship, shared rooms at the college, a cosmological prelude, and an early printed assent. That is what the documents will bear. The respectable doctor and the occult encyclopedist are one life with two presses. The college made him a censor and put his name on a pharmacopoeia. Germany cut his cosmograms in copper. Patients in Fenchurch Street and later in Coleman Street met the physician. Readers in the Empire met the author of the two worlds. Fuller met a man who could make a patient believe. Kepler would meet, on the page, a man who thought a picture was a proof. A gentleman's son from Kent spent 3 years being examined and admonished by the body that licensed London medicine. Then that body sat him on the censor's bench and asked him to examine other men. The quarrel was about Galen and Paracelsus, about who may speak for a wound and a drug. The later quarrel will be about pictures and proofs. Both quarrels happened to the same fellow. Paracelsian medicine was a rival learned system with its own pathology, its own chemistry, and its own devout readers. The college's quarrel with Fludd was a professional quarrel about authority. Galen against the chemical philosophy conducted in the minutes of a licensing body. He lost, and then he won, and then he sat on the side that had refused him. The minutes show how a corporation absorbs a heretic when the heretic is a gentleman and a success. By 1617, the amanuensis was taking down more than case notes. Manuscripts were being packed for the Palatinate. The physician had a book the size of a world. London would not cut the copper. Chapter 4. The History of the Two Worlds. Oppenheim, 1617. The 500 pounds has already been named. Here is the shop that made the other offer. The History of the Two Worlds is a metaphysical, physical, and technical encyclopedia of the greater world and the lesser. Two dedications stand at the front. The first is to the deity. The second is to James I. The first volume, on the greater world, came from Oppenheim in 1617 and 1618. The second, on the human frame, from 1619. Parts continued into the early 1620s, some still at Oppenheim, some at Frankfurt. The plan was larger than the printed result. 2 volumes were intended, the first of 2 treatises, the second of 3. What appeared reached only as far as the first section of the second treatise of the second volume. Even unfinished, it is one of the most lavishly illustrated philosophical books of its century. The shop cut more than 60 plates, diagrams of creation, of music, of machines, of memory, and a black field with 4 words around it. The work was printed in Germany because English printers had priced the copper out of reach. 14 years after the first volume, answering a Buckinghamshire clergyman who had sneered that he sent his books beyond the seas to escape the bishops, Fludd gave the account already heard. Home printers had demanded 500 pounds. Beyond the seas, the cuts were made at no cost of his, and as he would wish. The sentence is from his English answer of 1631. It is a self-account, and it is the hinge on which the pictures turn. The house was Johann Theodor de Bries at Oppenheim in the Palatinate. He was the son of Théodore de Brie, the liege-born engraver whose shop had already, a generation earlier, learned how to take drawings made in England and turn them into European plates. The elder de Brie had come to England in 1587 to gather material for the great voyage collections. The America, with plates after John White's Virginia drawings, is the famous case. The son inherited a firm that understood English paper, English sketches, and the market for heavily illustrated folios. Parts of Fludd's history were printed for him by Hieronymus Galler. Into that shop, around 1616, came a young etcher from Basel, Mutayuz Mareun. He was 22 or 23. In February 1617, he married Murua Magdalena de Brie, the printer's daughter. Some of Fludd's title pages and plates bear Marian's signature. Others belong to the de Brie shop without a personal name. Modern catalogs commonly credit the illustrations to Johann Theodor de Brie and to Marian. The work is workshop work, a marriage, a burin, the engraver's cutting tool, and a rush of folios. The first volume of the Two-World History appears in the same year as the wedding. Fludd designed one fade. The historian of alchemical imagery, or Shula Shulakovska, states the division cleanly. He designed the images. The artisans employed at his publishers engraved them. Some of his own original drawings still exist for the first volume. He declared himself satisfied that the cuts were as he wished. The remaining mystery is a collaboration across a sea. A London physician dictated to an amanuensis at untimely hours and sent packets to Oppenheim. A Palatine workshop translated those packets into copper. A basilecher, new in the family, gave some of the plates a line that later centuries would learn to recognize as Marian's. What the reader sees turning the folio is both men and a shop and a technology. The book holds more than cosmograms. Fludd used the common metaphor of the arts as the ape of nature, a copy in the little world of how the universe itself worked, and he filled the technical history with the practical knowledges he was proud to command: mechanics, architecture, military fortification and formations, hydrology, musical instruments, mathematics, geometry, optics, the art of drawing, chemistry, medicine. There are machines, including devices later readers would class with perpetual motion. There are pipes and organs. There are diagrams that belong as much to an engineer's album as to a mystic's. The same press that cut the void cut a water wheel. The encyclopedia was the point, two worlds, and every art he could command. After Johann Theodor de Brie died in 1623, the line of Fludd's German printing continued through successors, Frankfurt imprints, later names. The first vision, the one that fixed the book's face, was Oppenheim in the years when Marian married into the house. Those are the plates that come down. The black square, the woman on the chain, the monochord, the temple of music, the memory theater. They come down as German copper after English invention. That mystery needs a shipping chest and a price in pounds. James I received the dedication. Whether he received the book as a king receives a compliment, or as a reader receives a system, is unrecorded in any scene that survives. Fludd had already sent him, in manuscript, a short declaration of philosophical innocence with continental testimonials attached. The dedication and the declaration are the English politics of a German publication. They are also a reminder that the author remained a subject, a gentleman, and a man who wanted the crown on his side while the copper was cut in a Calvinist palatinate. London would not cut the copper. Open the first volume to its most famous plate. a woman, a chain, an ape, and the whole of nature arranged in rings. The workshop made it legible. The doctor made it mean. The reading is the next work. Chapter 5. The Mirror of All Nature. Oppenheim, 1617. The woman on the chain is the plate that taught Europe to see Fludd at a glance. Its Latin title is Integra Naturae Speculum Artisque Imago, a mirror of the whole of nature and an image of art. It is the great cosmological diagram of the first volume, issued with the Oppenheim parts of 1617 and 1618, and it is among the most reproduced esoteric images in Europe. Later viewers have called it the world soul, wearing a woman's body, the great chain, drawn as a nude. The plate's own name is drier and better. It is a mirror, and it is an image of art. It offers to show nature whole, and to show what art is in relation to her. Read it from the rim inward, as a document, following the description Wayne Schumacher gave in the occult sciences in the Renaissance. The outermost circles hold the celestial hierarchy in symbols: cherubim, seraphim, archangels. Within those, the sphere of the fixed stars, then the planets, then further spheres of fire and air. This is a Ptolemaic and Christian cosmos still, a nested world. The plate argues correspondence. At the top, beyond the rings, a hand, the hand of God, holds a chain. The chain descends to a nude female figure who stands in the middle of the created world. She is nature. Schumacher notes that she is pictured as a virgin with starry hair, so that she will be read as nature, a Christian figure. The stars in the hair are a theological precaution. From her other hand, the chain continues downward, and at its end is an ape. The ape is art. Art, the ape of nature, is a Renaissance commonplace. Art copies. Art learns by watching. Along the chain, in Fludd's design, God's powers and effects are transmitted from the divine hand through nature into the human talent that apes her. Nature's feet are placed with doctrine. Earth under one foot, standing for sulfur, water under the other, standing for mercury. Their joining through her body figures generation, the chemical wedding written as posture. The sun is pictured at her breast. Schumacher, reading Fludd's own notes, says the sun is nature's heart. Her belly is filled with the moon. From the breast, in the plate's logic, come the life and vitality of elemental creatures. The breast also feeds them. She is a cosmology that can be nursed. The innermost rings, still following Schumacher, descend through the kingdoms and then through the arts. They hold animals, vegetables, and minerals. Then they hold the more liberal arts, a broader Fluddian list of the mechanical and mathematical arts. Then 3 further circles show art at work, arts that supplement nature in the animal kingdom, help her in the vegetable, and correct her in the mineral. The ape is a technician around nature. In those inner rings, the creatures are paired as if in an arc of emblems, kingdom answering kingdom, plant and mineral each set in their rank. The minerals are tagged to their planets, the old metallic sky brought down into a cabinet. The grammar of the whole is the grammar later readers name with a sentence from the emerald tablet, as above, so below. The plate is already that sentence, drawn. What happens in the angelic circles happens, by chain and breast and foot, in the still and the beehive. The greater world and the lesser are one instrument. The physician who had analogized the sun to the heart in his anatomy is here analogizing everything to everything and hiring a German Burin to make the analogy visible at a glance. The doctrine is a late Renaissance Christian natural philosophy, Paracelsian and Mosaic, already old-fashioned among some of the men who would review it. The survival is the copper. A viewer who cannot read a word of Fludd's Latin can still read the chain. God, nature, and art stand in that order. Stars, planets, and elements occupy their rings. A woman stands on the two principles of the chemical philosophy and feeds the world from a solar breast. An ape stands at the end of the line and holds the tools. 4 centuries of reproduction have been reproducing a picture that organizes a world at the speed of sight. The plate is a window onto what an English doctor, around 1617, thought a world picture should look like, and onto what an Oppenheim workshop could cut from his design. The starry hair is a decision. The ape is a decision. The decision to put art at the bottom of a divine chain, rather than outside it, is a decision. Later, occultism would take the image as a revelation. The copper takes it as a frontispiece, the most successful page in a book whose arguments traveled less far than its engravings. There is another plate in the same encyclopedia that tries the same work in a different key. Not a woman and a chain. A string. Chapter 6. The Divine Monochord. The same folio a year later. Reality in the next plate is a single string. A monochord is a box with one string, a movable bridge, and a history older than the printed book. Pythagoras, in the story the schools told, heard hammers in a smithy and went home to divide a string. The ratios he found, 1/2, 2/3, 3/4, were the octave, the fifth, the fourth. For 2,000 years, the monochord was how a person showed that music was number. Boethius, whose Latin framed the subject for the Middle Ages, divided music into 3. Musica mundana, the music of the world. Musica humana, the music of the human frame. Musica instrumentalis, the music a hand can play. Fludd comes late in that line, and he does something the line had rarely done. He has the world drawn as the instrument itself. The plate is the monochord, in the Latin of the heading, Monochordum Mundi. From the section of the first volume devoted to the music of the world, often dated with the 1618 part. A single string runs the height of the cosmos. The stops along it are the elements, the planetary spheres, the grades of being up to the empyrean. A divine hand, or the diagram's own tuning apparatus, sets the tension. The universe in the picture is a chord. To change a ratio would be to change a heaven. This is Pythagorean cosmology in the pictorial tense. Other writers had assigned notes to planets. Fludd makes the assignment a picture one can hang. Later hand-colored copies, the ones that circulate now as posters of the harmony of the spheres, are doing the work the plate was built to do. They let the eye take in, at once, a claim that would take pages of Latin to argue. The claim is that the same numbers that make a string pleasing make a world lawful, and that the creator is a musician in the strict sense, a divider of a length. No one in Oppenheim was measuring orbital periods with a violin. Beside the monochord, in the same technical history, stands another building that is a treatise in stone. The Temple of Music, Templum Musicae, is an architectural fantasia, columns, arches, towers, a courtyard, chambers stacked like chapters. The ornaments encode the elements of music theory, modes, proportions, instruments, the furniture of a speculative academy. Peter Hauge and others have read the Temple of Music as music theory in architectural dress, a mnemonic palace whose rooms are lessons. It is what happens when a man who thinks in theaters of memory decides that music, too, should be a house one can walk. The temple of music includes, among its marvels, machines, a mechanical music device of the sort Fludd liked to invent on paper. The encyclopedist and the mechanician are the same hand. Harmony for him is engineered as well as heard. The inherited triad remains in force. The music of the world is the monochord's vertical string. The music of the human frame is the answering proportion, the body tuned as the sky is tuned. The music of instruments is the audible remainder, the part a viol can prove. Fludd's originality is the decision to spend copper on the triad until a reader who will never finish the Latin still possesses the idea. That afterlife is already underway in the 17th century and has never really stopped. Wherever a modern book on speculative music or the harmony of the spheres needs an image, the monochord tends to arrive, often uncoupled from the folio that bore it, often brightened by a colorist who was never Marian. The plate has become what the woman on the chain became, a free-floating emblem, a picture that outran the system. It is possible to know the monochord well and never to have read a page of the music of the world. That is the plate succeeding as a survival object. Reality as a chord is a beautiful thesis. It is also, as a thesis about the physical heavens, a thesis that can be checked. Another man, working from Tycho's observations and from a lifetime of orbit computation, was at the same moment writing a book that used the word harmony for something a person could measure with angles and periods. He would add an appendix. He would look at pictures of this kind and refuse them the name of demonstration. The string on the page does not know that yet. It runs from Earth to the Empyrean, divided, waiting for a hand. The hand in the engraving is God's. The hand that would tug the other way was an imperial mathematician's in Linz, with a different folio open. Chapter 7. The Duel with Kepler. Linz, 1619. A mathematician opens an appendix and refuses a picture, the name of proof. In 1619, Johannes Kepler published Harmonices Mundi, The Harmony of the World, in 5 books. The first 2 treat regular polygons and the congruence of figures. The third treats the origin of harmonic proportions in music. The fourth treats harmonic configurations in astrology. The fifth treats the harmony of the planetary motions. Buried in that 5th book is the relation later astronomy would call Kepler's third law, the sesquialterate proportion between the periodic times of the planets and their mean distances from the sun. The same volume that still feeds the history of celestial mechanics ends with an appendix against an English physician's pictures. Kepler had seen Fludd's cosmic harmony. He declined it as a demonstration. The contrast, as historians of the exchange reconstruct it, is a quarrel inside a shared inheritance. Both men believe the world is harmonious. Both inherit Pythagoras. Kepler requires that a harmony claimed of the heavens be shown in quantities taken from observed motions, in angles, periods, ratios that survive measurement. He treats Fludd's cosmological diagrams, in the received characterization of the critique, as pictures or hieroglyphs, images that may move the mind and that stop short of proof. Fludd, in Veritatis Proscenium, a proscenium of truth published at Frankfurt in 1621, answers from a Platonist position and claims that the hermetic or chemical approach goes deeper than the mathematical. The words are the received paraphrase of that reply. The structure of the quarrel does not depend on a single barbed noun. One man will not let a world picture count as evidence. The other will not let measurement have the last word on a world he takes to be a theophany. Kepler wrote again in 1622 a mathematical apology for his harmony. Fludd answered that year with Monochordum Mundi Symphoniacum, a monochord of the world in concert, and reprinted the reply inside the threefold anatomy of 1623. The titles themselves are a duet, a proscenium of truth, a monochord of the world, a harmony of the world, and they are fighting for the same noun. What tears in 1619 is a word two Christian natural philosophers can no longer share without a polemic. Kepler is imperial mathematician, a Lutheran with a Pythagorean god, a man who can write of the planets as singers in a polyphony and also compute an orbit to a residual Tycho would have recognized. Fludd is a fellow of the London College, a mosaic philosopher who uses number constantly, ratios, geometries, the whole monochord, and who refuses Kepler's account of what a number is for. The charge against Fludd is that he takes a correspondence, once drawn, to be a proof. The charge against Kepler from Fludd's side is that he has mistaken the surface of quantity for the depth of the archetype. They staged the tear in diagrams. Kepler's pages in the harmony are thick with polygons, with musical staffs tied to planetary speeds, with the machinery of a proof. Fludd's pages, already in the world when Kepler wrote the appendix, are the plates already read, the intersecting pyramids of light and matter, the monochord, the nested spheres. The quarrel is, among other things, a quarrel about whether those plates are doing the work of knowledge or the work of painting. Later summaries often say that Kepler called Fludd's images hieroglyphs. The characterization is useful if it is kept as a characterization, the received description of a critique. The measurable harvest of Kepler's book went forward into astronomy. The pictorial harvest of Fludd's book went forward into the albums of esoteric Europe. That fork is real. It is also tidier in retrospect than it was on the table. Kepler never purged his own work of harmonic theology. Fludd never stopped using geometry. What the appendix documents is a moment when two uses of the word harmony could no longer share a page. In 1952, the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, in an essay later collected as The Influence of Archetypal Ideas on the Scientific Theories of Kepler, returned to this exchange and made it a parable for a later physics still haunted by what it had excluded. Pauli's reading is reception. It is evidence that the quarrel itself survived as a text about method long after either folio had left the working desk of astronomers. Two books then, both titled with harmony, both illustrated, both theological, published within 2 years, one in the Austrian lands, one in the Palatinate, by way of London. Between them, a tier that later centuries would widen into a canyon and call the birth of the modern. The documents are narrower and stranger. They are a mathematician refusing a picture, and a physician refusing to call the refusal deep. London would not cut the copper. The pictures Kepler refused were already in the world because a Palatine shop had accepted the work. The physician had another picture ready, in the human frame volume of the same years, a playhouse, 5 doors, a terrace with battlements. He said it was a real theater. In the 20th century, a historian believed him and named the house. Chapter 8, The Theater of Memory, The Human Frame Volume, 1619. Fludd publishes a treatise on how to remember, and tells the workshop to cut a public stage. The art is older than the playhouses, and older than Fludd. A Roman orator, preparing a speech, memorized a building. In each recess, and on each column, he set an image. Delivering the speech, he walked the building in his mind. Cicero describes the method. The anonymous Rhetorica ad Heroneum gives the rules. Quintilian passes them on. The places are lochi. The images are imagines, agentes, active pictures. If the orator lacks enough real rooms, the manuals already allow him to invent fictitious ones. The distinction between real and fictitious places is already in the school books. The Renaissance enlarged the art into a cosmology. Giulio Camillo, in the 16th century, designed a memory theater that would hold the world, a Vitruvian auditorium whose statues and inscriptions were to imprint the order of nature and of man upon a single mind. He is the ancestor one needs in order to see what Fludd thought he was doing. In the second volume of the History of the Two Worlds, published in 1619, Fludd devoted a treatise to the art of memory. He divides the art into a round part, which uses the heavens, zodiac, planets, and a set of memory theaters geared to those heavens, in which the contents of nature and of man are to be stored. He writes a whole chapter against fictitious buildings. Only real buildings, he says, are to be used. The classical manuals had allowed invented rooms. Fludd closes that door. Memory, in his system, must be housed in architecture a person could walk into on a London afternoon. In the text above the principal engraving, he specifies what he means by a theater, a public theater in which comedies and tragedies are acted. The great wooden playhouses of London were technically public theaters. The specification is load-bearing. He asked for the kind of house in which comedies and tragedies were acted before a paying public. The plate shows a stage closed in as a room. 5 entrances pierce the back wall, 3 on the ground, the center pair of leaves half open on an inner space, 2 above, giving onto a battlemented terrace. In the center of the upper level, a chamber projects with a bay window. The walls are rusticated, as if stone. Along the front, for mnemonic use, sit 5 column bases whose shapes Fludd specifies in the text, round, square, hexagonal, and which he himself, in part, calls feigned. Lettering on the window gives the plate a Latin name, Theatrum Orbi, the theater of the world. After that, the plate is the memory theater. In 1958, Richard Bernheimer reproduced this engraving in Shakespeare Quarterly. He recognized, as any Shakespearean would, a lower and an upper stage, flanking doors, battlements fit for a siege, a bay window from which a Juliet might lean. Then he withdrew. Read as a whole theater, the plate was impossibly small, a room with boxes like a tennis court. He would not make it a playhouse. 8 years later, Francis Yates did. In chapters X-Speed and X-Teen of The Art of Memory, and in an essay for the New York Review of Books in May 1966, Yates argued that Fludd's engraving preserves visual evidence of the lost interior of Shakespeare's second globe. The first globe had burned in 1613 and been rebuilt on the same foundations. James I, who had taken the Chamberlain's men as the King's men, had an interest in that rebuilding. Fludd had dedicated the Greater World volume to James and was, in those years, seeking the King's protection. If he insisted on a real public theater, Yates reasoned, the theater a man in that position would choose was the second globe, still new, still the King's. She treated the plate as evidence to be read and then subtracted. She subtracted what she took to be mnemonic distortions, the closing side walls, the 5 feigned columns, and what she allowed might be German influence at the engraving end. What remained, she believed, was the tiring house wall of a theater used solely for acting, 5 entrances, a terrace, a projecting chamber, rustication that could be canvas painted as stone. Combined with the DeWitt sketch of the Swan, the only other interior view then in play, the memory theater gave her a globe no one had seen. A man in London, in the years after the globe was rebuilt, told a German workshop to cut a puppet theater for a book about the little world of man. The workshop cut what it was given. 4 centuries later, a historian at the Warburg Institute held the cut up to the light and named the house. For a season, Fludd became, in print, a Shakespearean source. The naming is the second scene promised at the start. A historian in 1966, an engraving, a lost stage. The identification was disputed as soon as it was printed. Chapter 9. The Second Globe. London and New York, 1966. The Memory Theater has left the folio and entered a Shakespearean argument. F. W. Brownlow, writing to the New York Review that July, called Yeats's identification weak. Fludd's real, he argued, may mean usable rather than a particular building. A memory system needs a building that will hold images. It does not, by that need, name the building. To make the plate into an Elizabethan playhouse, Yeats has to alter it radically, throw back walls, dispose of impossible columns, enlarge the center door. Dedication to James I is a compliment, and it is silent on the name of any house. At most, Brownlow granted, the back wall is a modified tiring house screen of a kind probably common to the open stages. The screen may be evidence of a type. The type is still short of a caption that says Globe. Glenn Wickham replied in the same journal that November. Yeats answered, defended, conceded imperfections, and asked that the plate at least be admitted as evidence. She had already admitted mnemonic distortions in her first statement, the closing sidewalls, the extra columns, possible German influence at the engraving end. Her method was subtraction. Remove what the memory treatise required and what a Palatine Burin might have added, and read what remains as a tiring house wall. Brownlow's method was to leave the plate whole. A whole plate that has to be taken apart before it looks like a playhouse is, on that view, a poor witness to a named house. It was admitted as a controversy. It stayed a controversy. Later reconstructions of the globe have drawn on documents Yeats also knew: the fortune contract, the DeWitt sketch of the Swan, the Bankside panoramas, and, after the late 1980s, on the archaeological remains of the Rose and of the globe itself, plans no one in 1966 possessed. Those excavations gave the field independent ground plans. They have not been used in the scholarship that followed as a line-by-line verdict on Fludd's doors. What they have done is give later builders something Yeats did not have. Those later builders have treated the engraving as a memory theater that uses the idea of a public stage, and they have left the proper name unproved. The plate is not a photograph of the globe. The plate is certainly a memory theater. Fludd says so. It has 5 doors because he needed 5 loci, and because 5 is a number a memory system can walk. The 5 doors are also the feature Yeats mapped onto a tiring house facade, the Franz Skyanyai Shakespeareans had inferred from stage directions and had never seen drawn from inside a named house, the Swan sketch excepted. Both readings used the same 5 openings. One reading stops at the memory treatise. The other keeps walking toward the Bankside. Whether those 5 doors are also the 5 doors of the second globe is a question the documents leave open. Yeats's case is ingenious, and it is famous, and it is contested. All 3 adjectives belong on the table at once. You can hold the plate in 2 hands. You cannot settle whether the playhouse on it ever stood on the Bankside. The perhaps is the honest word. It is also the word that makes the picture stranger than a solved identification would have been. A solved globe would have been a source. An open globe is a survival problem. An English doctor asked for a real public theater. A German shop cut a room with 5 doors, and 4 centuries later, the cut is still being asked to do work its author never named. The memory theater is, by 1966, loose in the world the way the other 4 plates are loose. The black square, the woman on the chain, the monochord, the temple of music, and the memory theater travel as images first and as arguments second. Yeats made one of them briefly a Shakespearean source. He remains a Shakespearean source only as a controversy. That is a kind of survival, and a costly one. Every later writer who wants a window onto the second globe will meet this plate, and will have to spend a paragraph putting it back into a memory treatise. A man who had insisted on real buildings left behind a building whose reality is still being tried. The German workshop cut what it was given. The given included feigned columns, rusticated walls, and a public stage. The afterlife included a Warburg historian, 2 replies in a New York review, and an excavation on the bankside that Yeats did not live to use. The copper is what remains of the memory system and, perhaps, of a wooden house. London would not cut the copper. A Palatine shop cut a playhouse instead, and the playhouse is still on trial. The same years that produced the memory treatise produced another printed loyalty to a brotherhood no one could find. Chapter 10. The Invisible Brotherhood. Leiden, 1616. An English physician spends ink on a fraternity he had met on paper. He published a short Latin pamphlet whose title is a pun on his own name. Apologia compendia. Ru frate harnitatem, de rosaiu cruce suspicionis maculis aspersam, vehuitatis quasi fluctibus abluenze, a compact apology, washing as if with floods the stains of suspicion from the fraternity of the Rose Cross. The opponent named by the controversy was Andreas Liebehaveus, the German chemist, whose analysis of the Rose Cross Confession in 1615 had charged that fraternity with heresy, diabolical magic, and sedition. Fludd's pamphlet is a defense of a printed idea. The year after, still at Leiden, he issued a longer revision, Tractatus Apologeticus, a treatise defending the integrity of the Society of the Rose Cross. The same year, at Oppenheim, a theological philosophical tract appeared under the name Rudolf Otreb, an anagram of Robert Fludd, dedicated to the Rosicrucian fraternity, in 3 books on life, on death, and on resurrection. The anagram is a humanist veil. Anyone who cared could lift it. Anonymous German pamphlets of 1614, 1615, and 1616 had announced a reforming brotherhood of the Rose Cross. Europe answered in hundreds of printed pages. Whether any such order then existed as a house with a door is a historical problem of its own. What belongs here is narrower. An English fellow of the College of Physicians, from Leiden, and from the same Oppenheim shop that was cutting his cosmograms, spent ink defending the fraternity's good name. William Huffman, who wrote the modern study that most carefully places Fludd at the end of the Renaissance, holds that he was not a member of a Rosicrucian order. A 1992 review of Huffman accepted that conclusion, a leading advocate of Renaissance Christian Neoplatonism and a defender in print. He is in the documents as a defender. He left no lodge minutes. The Dictionary of National Biography reports that Michael Meyer, the German alchemist, visited Fludd in London and commended the movement to his notice. The visit is a report, undated in any surviving letter. It is enough to place Fludd in the ordinary traffic of the controversy, books crossing the channel, men crossing after them, a London physician deciding that Liebehaveus should not have the last word. He also wrote, for James I, a manuscript Declaratio Brevis, a short declaration, now among the royal manuscripts in the British Library. In it, he defends himself as an innocent follower of divine and ancient philosophies, and he appends confirmatory letters from continental associates. One, which the older dictionary notes, is from Eustace Helt, dated the 20th of April, 1617. The king is being asked to see a loyal subject. The same king had received the dedication of the history of the two worlds. The apology and the encyclopedia are parts of one campaign of respectability. Whether he was defending a real order or a beautiful fiction is a question the pamphlets leave open. He never produced a London Lodge book. He never named a superior in England. He never described a meeting he attended. He described and defended a society he had met on paper, whose enemies he took to be enemies of a pious natural philosophy. Later esoteric traditions enrolled his name anyway. 19th century writers called him the English Rosicrucian, as if the adjective were an office. The afterlife of the name is part of how the pictures and the pamphlets traveled. It is evidence of reception. The dignity owed to living Rosicrucian and esoteric Christian traditions is the dignity owed to any religious form. People still take the Rose Cross as a spiritual current. They are neighbors to this history. The subject is a man in 1616 who published, in Latin, from a Dutch press, a washing of stains. The stains were Libavius's charges. The water was ink. The fraternity, if it existed, sat for no portrait in the Oppenheim folios. What sat for the portrait was Fludd's willingness to be seen on its side. That willingness has a cost and a use. The cost is that every later encyclopedia entry will call him a Rosicrucian, and the correction, defender, Brotherhood met on paper, will always arrive a sentence late. The use is that his apology is one of the ways the German pamphlets became a European event. A London physician's Latin, printed at Leiden, told Protestant and Catholic readers alike that an English learned man would stand up for the Rose Cross. Standing up in a controversy conducted entirely in print can look like admission. He had other wars to fight, closer to the surgery and the parish. One of them would be nailed to his door. Chapter 11. The Weapon-Salve War. London, 1631. A parson nails a title page to a doctor's door. The salve is applied to the weapon. That is the whole of the method at the level the controversy requires. A wound is cleaned and bound. The blade or the shaft or whatever made the hole is treated with an ointment. The virtue that heals is supposed to travel the distance between them, by sympathy, by magnetism, by a correspondence of the kind Fludd's entire cosmology was built to make thinkable. The weapon salve, unguentum armorium on first naming, was already a European medical quarrel before he entered it. A Paracelsian therapy, an action at a distance, a test case for whether hidden virtues were natural philosophy or a crime. He had defended the salve in the Threefold Anatomy of 1623, the same Frankfurt book that held his cosmological circulation of the blood. He presented the cure as nature. The respectable English physics he leaned on was William Gilbert's. In 1600, Gilbert had published De Magnete, and had shown, with a sphere of lodestone he called a terrella, that the earth itself behaves as a magnet. Needle's point. Forces act without a visible push. Fludd's leap, and it is a leap, is to treat the salve's action as the same class of invisible virtue. Gilbert had written of the lodestone. Fludd enlisted the magnet as an analogy. The analogy is the controversy. In 1631, a clergyman of Hedgerley in Buckinghamshire, William Foster, published Hoplochrysma Spongus, or A Sponge to Wipe Away the Weapon-Salve. The title page was a weapon of its own. Foster suggested that Fludd's defense was enough to raise a suspicion of witchcraft. Alan Debus, who followed the pamphlet war, records that Foster went so far as to nail a copy of that title page to Fludd's door. A fellow of the College of Physicians, a censor, a man with his own apothecary, came home to a parson's sponge on the wood. He answered the same year, and he answered in English, the only original pamphlet he wrote in his own tongue. Dr. Fludd's Answer unto M. Foster, or The Squeezing of Parson Foster's Sponge. The cure, he says, is natural. Such matters belong to learned physicians. A Latin version would be printed at Gouda in 1638, after his death, sometimes bound with the last synthesis of his philosophy. The English of 1631 is the document of the door. It is also the document that holds the 500-pound sentence. The parson had sneered at printing beyond the seas. The doctor, squeezing the sponge, named the price London had asked. Period descriptions of the salve in the pamphlets and in later summaries of them name ingredients that belong to the rhetoric of suspicion as much as to the pharmacy, substances associated with the gallows and the grave. The list can stay in the pamphlets. What matters is the atmosphere. A published medical controversy still moved in, blood, weapon, distance, and a clergyman ready to call the distance a crime. Fludd's counter is professional territory. Physicians, not parsons, judge a salve. London was one theater. France was another. In 1623, the year of the threefold anatomy, Marin Mersenne attacked Fludd in Quaestiones Celebres in Genesime, celebrated questions on Genesis, objecting to the use of Scripture as a scientific authority and to the large claims of Hermetic philosophy. Fludd answered late, in 1629, with Sophiae cum more certamen, the contest of wisdom with folly, at Frankfurt. The same year, under the name Joachim Fritzius, he issued Summum Bonum, a further reply after Mersenne had accused him of magic. Mersenne asked Pierre Gassendi to take the matter up. In 1630, Gassendi published the Examen Philosophiae Fluddiae. He rejected Fludd's Neoplatonism. He rejected the syncretic move that set alchemy, Kabbalah, and Christian religion on the same footing. He rejected the world soul. He dismissed Fludd's biblical exegesis. The Paris-Provence attack is broader than the Salve. It is an attack on the whole system, mounted by the men who were then building a mechanical account of nature. Two theaters then, and they belong in separate rooms. In London, 1631, a Buckinghamshire parson nails a title page to a doctor's door and is squeezed in English. In France, 1623 to 1630, a minim friar and a priest philosopher of Aix dismantle, in Latin, the Mosaic philosophy as a way of knowing. The Weapon-Salve is the English face of a larger refusal. Action at a distance, the magnet's virtue, the salve's virtue, the chain that runs from God's hand to the ape, is what the new philosophy is learning to allow only where a measurement can trap it. Fludd is, in that decade, the same man who has just supported Harvey's book on the heart in print. The colleague's book is a demonstration of a circuit inside the body. The salve is a claimed circuit outside it, from steel to flesh across a room. He can hold both. The men in Paris refuse the second circuit. The parson in Hedgerley will not grant it even the name of nature. You do not have to believe a sword can heal a wound. You do have to see what it cost him to say so. A fellow of the college, at the dawn of the mechanical age, thought sympathy was still nature, and said so until the door shook. The pamphlets, the nailed page, the squeezing, the French examen, those are the documents. The ointment received no trial here. He had 6 years left of life after the English answer. The last book would be printed without him. The stone in Kent was already, in some sense, waiting. Chapter 12. And so on to infinity. Bierstedt, 1637. And the body comes home to Ragstone he had already laid. He died on the 8th of September, 1637, at his house in the parish of St. Catherine, Coleman Street, in London. He had lived earlier in Fenchurch Street. He was unmarried. The body was conveyed to Bierstedt, in Kent, with some ceremony. The college roll notes an officer or herald of arms in the cortege. He was buried in the chancel of Holy Cross Church, under a stone he had already laid for the purpose. The slab carries a Latin motto and an English sentence: In Jesu qui mihi omnia in vita morte resurgam. In Jesus, who is all things to me, I shall rise in death, as in life. Then, the vernacular: Under this stone resteth the body of Robert Fludd, Doctor of Physic, who changed this transitory life for an immortal, the 8th day of September. Early transcriptions vary the spelling, Physica, immortal, as English slabs of that decade do. The words are his arrangement. This is the stone he prepared. The wall monument is someone else's piety. On the 10th of August, 1638, his nephew Thomas Fludd of Gore Court, Oldham, erected a monument with a bust and a long Latin epitaph, following directions the doctor had left. It was to be in the style of Camden's monument at Westminster. Slab and monument are easily crushed into one epitaph. He wrote the floor. The nephew raised the wall. Mutius Muraean had already engraved his face, a bald head, a high forehead, the look later print collectors would say appeared in several copies. Recuts went on after both men were dead. The face that circulates is a Basil Etcher's idea of the London physician, made in the years when the same hand or the same shop was still finishing the folios. The last synthesis, Philosophia Moisiaca, was printed at Gouda in 1638. An English version, Mosaical Philosophy, waited until 1659. A later book issued under the name Achlitophilis, and sometimes assigned to him, differs wholly from his genuine work. The genuine remainder is the German and Dutch folios, the one English pamphlet against Foster, the manuscript declaration to James, and the copper. The copper is what had an afterlife. The black square, a diagram of the darkness before creation, re-entered modern looking as a precedent. In 1915, Kazimir Malevich hung a black square in Petrograd and founded a chapter of abstract art. What joins the two acts is a later century's double-take. The Void had already been printed as Genesis in a Palatine encyclopedia. The comparison is reception. It is also, by now, part of how the plate is seen. The monochord became the default illustration of a universe that can be tuned. Speculative musicians and historians of the harmony of the spheres lift it from the folio and let it stand alone. The woman on the chain became a textbook image of the great chain, nature as a woman on a chemical earth, art as an ape at the end of God's tether. The temple of music travels as a curiosity of music theory in stone. Neither plate needed the surrounding Latin in order to travel. That is what a successful engraving is. The Memory Theater became, in 1966, Francis Yates's disputed window onto the second globe, a claim that made Fludd briefly a Shakespearean source, which he remains only as a controversy. Wolfgang Pauli's essay of 1952 made the quarrel with Kepler into a parable for modern physics and what it had to exclude. The afterlife of the debate is the afterlife of a Forcan method, remembered because a later physicist needed a historical scene. How did the pictures outlive the philosophy they were drawn to serve? 4 facts about a survival will do. First, an English manuscript tradition survives as German copper because a London press asked £500 and an Oppenheim shop cut the plates at no cost to the author. Second, the exact division of labor between the doctor's drawings and the workshop's burin is only partly recoverable. Some autograph designs remain. Many plates are unsigned. This way, what? Marion's name is on some. The vision is shared, and the share cannot be weighed to the grain. Third, a theater engraving may or may not preserve a lost playhouse. The argument is famous and open. The plate is certainly a memory theater. The rest is scholarship at work. Fourth, a philosophical system that convinced few later natural philosophers produced a pictorial corpus that convinced the eye. The pictures came down. The Brotherhood he defended sat for no portrait. The Salve stayed a pamphlet war. The Monochord never became astronomy. The void on the first pages of the first volume is still, of all his claims, the one a stranger can receive without a glossary. The black square, the woman on the chain, the monochord, the temple of music, and the memory theater are still on the table. You are looking at a first page. You are also looking at a last image. He had the darkness engraved, and then he had the 4 words cut around it, because a field of ink cannot, by itself, say that it continues. The words do that work. Acts. Seek in infinitum, and so on to infinity. They were a cosmogony. They are also a fair account of a transmission. The manuscripts crossed. The copper was cut. The books were unfinished, and still too many. The stone was laid in Kent. The plates went on without him, into libraries, into Yates's chapters, into the accidental rhyme with the Russian square, into every cheap reproduction of a woman on a chain. London would not cut the copper. A Palatine shop did. That is why the pictures are still here. The void was a first page. It is the last image the record gives without remainder. The rest is commentary, controversy, and the quiet of a chancel, and so on.